What we did not say. Chapter 1. They had agreed not to speak about it again, which was why it lived between them now with such authority. He could feel it every time she shifted in her chair, every time her hand hovered near the cup and then withdrew. Nothing had happened. That was the problem. Nothing had happened, and still the room felt altered, like a house after a small fire. She sat at the small table by the window, her back straight, her coat folded beside her as if it might be needed suddenly. He stood at the counter longer than necessary, rinsing a cup that was already clean. Outside, the street made its ordinary sounds. Tires over wet pavement, a distant door slamming, someone laughing too loudly and then stopping. None of it reached them. "I can make tea," he said, though the kettle had already cooled. She nodded. "That would be nice." He filled the kettle again. The tap coughed, then ran steady. He watched the water rise, the small bubbles clinging to the metal. It occurred to him, with a brief and unwelcome clarity, that this was how most of his life had been lived, tending to things that did not need tending, delaying the moment when words became unavoidable. When he brought the cups over, she thanked him. Their fingers did not touch. He sat across from her, leaving the empty chair between them as if it were occupied. They drank in silence. The tea was hot enough to demand attention. She held the cup with both hands, her rings catching the light. He noticed, absurdly, that one of them had been repaired. A small seam of gold ran through it, visible only if you were looking for it. "How are you?" he asked. She smiled, a polite rearrangement of her face. "I'm well." He waited. She did not add anything. "And you?" she said, after a moment. "I'm all right." Another pause. They were both very good at this. Years of practice, refined through marriages, committees, funerals, the steady work of being agreeable. "You didn't have to come," he said, not looking at her. "I know." "Then why?" She raised a hand slightly. "Not a stop. A correction. You asked." He had. He remembered the email now, how carefully he had composed it, how he had reread it for tone and implication, how he had removed a sentence that sounded too eager and another that sounded too distant. He had ended with a question mark that felt like a risk. "I didn't mean for it to be," he trailed off. She set her cup down. The sound was louder than expected. "What did you mean for it to be?" He considered lying. He considered saying he had only wanted to see her, that it had been too long, that he thought it would be nice. All of these things were true, and all of them were insufficient. "I don't know," he said finally. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already decided. "Neither do I." The light shifted in the room. The afternoon was giving way, slowly, without drama. He had always liked this hour best, the way it softened edges without pretending to erase them. "I thought," she said, and then stopped. "Yes. I thought if we spoke again, it might settle. Whatever this is." "And has it?" She smiled again, this time without humor. "No." He leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked. He had bought the table years ago, after his wife died, choosing something small enough to make the room feel less empty. It had seemed practical at the time. Now it felt like a stage set for a conversation he had not known he was rehearsing for. "You look tired," he said. "So do you. Is that why you came?" he asked gently. "To check on me?" She met his eyes. There it was. The thing they both recognized and pretended not to. Not romance. Not yet. Something older. A claim without language. "No," she said. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about the last time." He felt a tightening in his chest. The last time. The phrase alone was enough to rearrange him. "We said we wouldn't." "I know what we said." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "I also know what we didn't say." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, she was watching him closely, as if he might vanish. "We were careful," he said. "Yes." "And nothing happened." "Yes." So what is it you want to say? She looked down at her hands. For the first time since arriving, she seemed unsure. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I want to know why it felt like something did. He did not answer right away. The truth, when it came, surprised him with its simplicity. Because we noticed, he said, each other. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh. We've always noticed each other. Not like that. They sat with this. The room held them without judgment. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She did not reach for it. After a moment, it stopped. I told him I'd be late, she said. He did not ask who. He did not need to. And I told her I had a meeting, he said. She raised an eyebrow. On a Sunday? He smiled, a little sheepish. She didn't ask. They shared a look that was both conspiratorial and ashamed. He felt it settle into him, heavy and undeniable. This was not an accident. This was a series of choices, small enough to excuse, large enough to matter. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said. Neither do I. And yet, she said. And yet. The silence returned, altered now. Less defensive, more dangerous. She stood and went to the window. He watched her reflection in the glass, the way the street overlaid her face. For a moment, she looked like a version of herself from years ago, someone he had known in another life. I should go, she said. He did not move. You just got here. Yes. But you're leaving. Yes. She turned to face him. This is how it starts, isn't it? The staying. He thought of all the times he had stayed when he should have gone, and gone when he should have stayed. He thought of the years that had narrowed behind him, the days that felt both full and unfinished. I don't know, he said. I've never been here before. She laughed softly. Neither have I. That's what frightens me. She reached for her coat. He stood as well, suddenly aware of the space between them, how charged it had become. He wanted, with a sudden and almost painful clarity, to touch her hand. He did not. At the door, she hesitated. Her back was to him. He could see the slight rise and fall of her shoulders. If we don't speak again, she said, will it pass? He considered this. He considered the careful life he had rebuilt, the routines that steadied him, the quiet evenings that felt earned. He considered her face when she had asked the question, the way it had already altered him. No, he said. I don't think it will. She turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded, once, as if accepting a diagnosis. All right, she said. Then we'll have to be better than this. He opened the door for her. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint. She stepped out, then turned back. Next time, she said and stopped. Yes. Next time, she said again, we don't pretend. He felt his breath catch. About what? She held his gaze. About why we're here. She left before he could answer. The door closed softly behind her, and the room seemed to exhale. He stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet assert itself. On the table, 2 cups sat cooling, the tea untouched now, the small fire still burning, unseen, in the walls. Chapter 2. That night, after she left, he washed the cups as if they were evidence. He ran the tap too hot and watched the steam lift. He scrubbed the inside of the porcelain longer than necessary, as if a certain kind of attention could undo another kind. When he set them on the rack, they looked innocent again, clean, ordinary. He stood there a moment with wet hands, listening to the apartment settle. The hallway light outside his door clicked off. Somewhere above him a television went quiet. The building returned to its usual soft breathing. It should have calmed him. Instead, it made the silence feel deliberate, like someone waiting in the next room. His phone was on the counter. Face down. He turned it over. No messages. He told himself he hadn't expected one. He put the phone in his pocket and walked to the window. The street had thinned. A bus hissed at the curb and then moved on. He watched its taillights slide away until they were nothing but 2 small red commas. He stood there too long, as if something might return. When he finally went to bed, he did it without ceremony. He brushed his teeth. He checked the locks twice. He lay down and arranged his body the way he always did, on the left side of the mattress, leaving room on the right that no one used anymore. Sleep came in fragments. Each time he drifted off, he heard her voice again, calm, deliberate, as if she were speaking from the other side of a door. Next time we don't pretend. He woke before dawn and lay still. The ceiling was a pale gray. His chest felt tight in a way that was not pain exactly, but a warning. He listened for the small sounds of morning, pipes, distant steps, the city turning itself on. When his phone lit up on the bedside table, he reached for it too quickly. It was his daughter. He stared at the name a moment, as if he'd forgotten what it meant to be claimed by something ordinary. Then he answered. "Morning," Marian said. Her voice had the brisk warmth of someone who'd already been awake for hours. "Did I wake you?" "No," he lied. A pause, quick and knowing. She did not press. "I'm coming by today," she said. "If that's all right." "Of course." "I have groceries," she added, as if the groceries were the real reason, as if she wasn't coming to check the weather of him. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." He closed his eyes. There were days her competence felt like a gift. There were days it felt like a mirror held too close. "What time?" he asked. "Late morning. 10ish. "All right." "And Dad?" "Yes." "Eat something before I get there," she said. "Not toast. Real food." He smiled despite himself. "Yes, ma'am." She laughed softly. "Good. See you soon." When he hung up, the apartment felt different. The promise of her arrival pressed the air into shape. He got up, opened the refrigerator, and stared into its empty middle shelf. There was half a lemon, a jar of mustard, a bowl with 2 sad apples. He made eggs. He ate them standing at the counter, as if sitting would make it a ritual, and rituals were dangerous now. After breakfast, he showered. He shaved. He put on a clean shirt. None of it was for Marianne. Not entirely. He told himself it was simply habit. He told himself a great many things. At 10:30, the buzzer rang. He let her in and listened to her steps climb the stairwell. When she knocked, he opened the door too fast. "Hi," she said, cheerful, and then her eyes scanned his face in that subtle way she had inherited from her mother. "You're up." "I'm always up." She said, unconvinced, and walked in with 2 bags of groceries, as if she'd always lived here. She set the bags on the table. The table, he thought absurdly, that had hosted a danger yesterday. Now it hosted oranges and bread and a carton of milk. Marian began putting things away without asking. She did it efficiently, the way she did everything, life managed into compartments. He watched her hands move, competent and steady. She was 58 now. He still sometimes saw her as a girl with scraped knees and fierce opinions. "How was your week?" she asked. "It was a week." She glanced back at him. That's not an answer. It was quiet. Quiet good or quiet bad. He leaned against the doorway. Quiet is just quiet. Marianne sighed lightly. She pulled out a packet of coffee and held it up. "New one. The good kind. I didn't ask for." "I know," she said again. "Drink it anyway." He watched her set it down. He watched her take out a small container of soup, the kind she made and froze in portions. "You're acting like I'm frail," he said. "I'm acting like you're stubborn," she replied. He smiled. "Fair." She shut the refrigerator and turned to face him. For a moment her expression softened. "Did you see anyone this weekend?" she asked. He felt his body respond before his mind did, a quick tightening. "Why?" "No reason," she said, too quickly. "Just you've been alone a lot." He could have answered truthfully, or he could have answered carefully. He chose the second. "I had coffee with someone," he said. Marian held his gaze. "Someone? A friend? How long a friend?" He hesitated. just long enough to be noticed. From years ago, he said. Marian nodded slowly. And how was that? He heard the question beneath the question. He also heard her restraint, how she did not want to make it easier for him to lie by naming what she suspected. It was fine, he said. Marianne's mouth tightened. It was not anger. It was a kind of sadness, practiced. Dad, she said softly. He looked at her. If there's something going on, she began and stopped. He waited. If you're starting to want things again, she said, choosing each word as if it might break, you're allowed. He looked away. The window showed a small slice of sky. Pale, clean, indifferent. It's not that, he said. Marian came closer. She put a hand on the back of the chair between them, not touching him, but anchoring herself. You say that, she said, like it would be a crime. He let out a breath. I don't want trouble. You'll have trouble either way, she said. That's the point. You can choose the kind. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was true, and truth sometimes arrived like a rude guest. I'm not doing anything, he said. Marian studied him. Okay. It was not an agreement. It was a pause. She went back to the groceries. He watched her pull out a loaf of bread, a jar of jam, a package of cheese. The ordinary supplies of continuing. Are you coming for lunch next week? She asked, turning away from him as if to make it easier for him to answer without pride. What day? Wednesday, she said. We're doing soup. And Clara wants to show you something she made. Clara was his granddaughter. 12. Serious in the way children were sometimes serious, as if they felt the weight of the world and were determined to carry it correctly. Tell her I wouldn't miss it, he said. Marian smiled. Good. She checked her watch. I have to go. Already. I have the dentist, she said. And then I'm meeting a friend. He nodded, pretending he did not envy the ease of her word for it. Friend, as if friendship were not sometimes the most dangerous category. At the door, she paused. Dad, she said. Yes. If it's her, Marian said quietly, be careful. His heart stuttered. Her. Marian did not elaborate. She didn't have to. The city was full of women he might have coffee with, but there was only one Marian met. He tried to keep his face steady. It's no one, he said. Marian looked at him a long moment. Then she leaned forward and kissed his cheek, her lips warm against his skin. Okay, she said and left. He stood alone in the doorway after she was gone. He listened to her footsteps fade down the stairs. He closed the door slowly, as if closing it too fast would admit something. In the kitchen, the coffee sat like an accusation. He made a cup anyway. He took it to the table. He sat in the chair he had sat in yesterday. He looked at the empty chair across from him. He tried to imagine what it would take to fill it again. His phone lay beside his cup, silent. He told himself he would not reach out. He told himself he would let her decide, since she had been the one to leave on that final line like a door closing on his fingers. But as the morning moved forward, the day felt full of small provocations. The bread Mary and had bought smelled too alive. The apartment felt too contained. Each room held its own quiet, and each quiet seemed to say the same thing. Are you going to live like this until you die? At noon, he sat down and wrote an email. Not long, nothing dramatic. The kind of message that could be read as polite, as if his heart weren't moving around like a trapped animal. He stared at the screen for 10 minutes before he typed a single word. Evelyn. He stopped. He read her name again, as if seeing it on a screen made it more real, more dangerous. He deleted it. He typed it again. He left it. He wrote, I've been thinking about what you said. If you still want to talk, I'm here. He added, no pressure. He deleted that line. He added, I hope you got home safely. He read it over. It sounded like a man checking on someone after a storm, not a man whose life had shifted because someone had stood in his doorway and refused to pretend. He hovered over send. His finger hesitated. Then he sent it. The message disappeared. The screen returned to its empty brightness. He sat there for a moment, feeling as if he had thrown something into water and was listening for the splash. Nothing. He spent the afternoon trying to be normal. He read the paper. He folded laundry he didn't need to fold. He walked to the corner shop and bought nothing except a small bar of chocolate he didn't even like. He returned and put it in a drawer, unopened, as if it might be needed later for a different kind of appetite. At 4, his phone buzzed. He grabbed it so fast the motion embarrassed him. It was a message from an unknown number. "It's me." He stared at the words. So plain, so intimate. He swallowed. Before he could reply, another message appeared. "Can you meet tomorrow?" He sat down hard in the chair. His pulse filled his ears. He typed, "Yes." "Where?" He watched the 3 dots appear, then vanish, then appear again. He imagined her standing with her phone in hand, thinking, finally, the river walk, by the benches near the old bridge. 11. He stared at the message, reading it as if it were an address to another life. He typed, "I'll be there." He waited for a response. None came. He set the phone down. He tried to finish his coffee. It tasted like nothing. Evelyn went home and put her keys in the bowl by the door as she always did. The bowl was ceramic, blue glazed, a little chipped at the rim. Paul had bought it years ago at a craft fair because she'd held it too long and smiled at it. She had loved him for that, the way he noticed her noticing. Now she looked at the bowl and felt tired. From the living room, she could hear the television. A sports commentator's voice rose and fell with manufactured excitement. Paul was on the couch, one arm stretched along the back, his feet propped on the ottoman. He turned his head when she entered, and his face opened into the same familiar warmth. "There she is," he said. "I thought you'd fallen into a bookshop and died." She smiled. "Not yet." "You're late," he said mildly. "I told you I might be," she replied. Paul muted the television. He watched her in that attentive way he still had, the way that had always made her feel both cherished and seen through. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," she lied. Paul waited. Then, gently, "Where were you?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was ordinary. That was almost worse. She took off her coat slowly. She hung it on the hook. Each movement felt like buying time in small denominations. "I went for coffee," she said. "With Joan?" he asked. Joan was her friend. A safe name. "No," Evelyn said. "Not Joan." Paul's eyebrows rose slightly. He didn't speak. He let silence do its work. Evelyn reached for the kettle. The domestic gesture calmed her. Or it tried to. "Who, then?" Paul asked. She heard the care in his voice. She also heard the small note of curiosity, the human instinct to locate someone in your spouse's hours. "A person I used to know," she said. Paul watched her fill the kettle. "Used to know how?" Evelyn's hand tightened around the handle. The water ran. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "From long ago," she said. Paul's tone stayed even. "A man." She could have avoided the answer. She could have turned it into a joke. She didn't. "Yes," she said. Paul blinked once. It was a small movement, almost nothing. She saw him put himself in order. "And why are you having coffee with a man from long ago?" he asked softly. Evelyn set the kettle on the base. The click sounded too sharp. "I don't know," she said, because it was the closest thing to truth she could bear. Paul studied her. His face did not harden. That was the mercy of him. He did not take pleasure in conflict. He did not need to win. He stood and came toward her. He stopped at a respectful distance, as if she might be startled. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She met his eyes. She felt suddenly exposed. Not because Paul was cruel, but because he wasn't. He was the kind of man you did not want to damage. "It wasn't," she began. Paul lifted a hand. Not to stop her, to slow her. "Are you unhappy?" he asked. The question landed in her chest like a stone in still water. She thought of all the years she'd spent being content, being grateful, being steady. She thought of their marriage, not passionate, perhaps, but loyal, warm, decent. "I'm not unhappy," she said. Paul nodded as if he'd expected that. "Then what is it?" Evelyn felt a sting behind her eyes. She turned away, pretending to check the kettle. It wasn't even warm yet. "I don't know," she whispered. Paul came closer. He did not touch her, but she could feel his presence like a hand. "Do you want him?" he asked, and his voice did not tremble. Evelyn's breath caught. She heard the word want like a bell struck in a quiet church. She did not answer. Paul exhaled slowly. "All right," he said very softly. "That's an answer." Evelyn turned, too fast, panic rising. "Paul." He looked at her. There was pain now, but it was contained, held tightly, as if spilling it would accomplish nothing. "Is this new?" he asked. Evelyn thought of the last time. Nothing happening, everything happening. She thought of the decades between then and now, the years where she had not thought of him at all, or had thought of him only in passing, like a street you once walked down. "It's the late," she said. Paul's mouth tightened. He nodded once. "Late?" he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. The kettle began to heat. The small sound of it building toward a boil filled the space between them. Paul stepped back. He picked up the remote and turned the television on again, low, as if noise could cover what had just been spoken. Evelyn stood there, holding herself very still. After a moment, Paul said, without looking at her, "Do you want tea?" She stared at him. He was offering her a bridge back to normal. "Yes," she said, though she didn't. He nodded. "Okay." They made tea together like two people performing a familiar dance after someone has changed the music. His hands moved in habits. Hers did too. They sat on opposite ends of the couch and held their cups. The television continued talking about a game neither of them watched. Finally, Paul spoke again. "How long has it been?" he asked. Evelyn stared into her tea. "Since I've seen him?" "Yes." "Decades," she said. Paul swallowed. "And he's still important?" Evelyn felt her throat tighten. The word important was too clean for what this was. Importance suggested a choice. This felt more like weather. "I don't know what he is," she said. "That's the trouble." Paul nodded slowly, as if he could accept confusion more easily than certainty. "And what happened today?" he asked. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. She set the cup down so he wouldn't see. "Nothing," she said. Paul looked at her sharply. "Nothing." "Yes," she said, and her voice cracked. "Nothing happened." Paul stared at her a long moment. He seemed almost relieved, and then, immediately, not relieved at all. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "nothing is sometimes worse." She shut her eyes. She wanted, suddenly, to be forgiven for a crime she hadn't committed. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. Paul's face softened in a way that made her chest ache. "Then don't," he said, simple and devastating. Evelyn opened her eyes. Paul reached out then and took her hand. His palm was warm, familiar. He held it with care, as if it were fragile. "We've had a good life," he said. "We have," Evelyn replied, and meant it. Paul looked down at their joined hands. "If you're going to break it," he said, and his voice shook now, just slightly, "at least tell me first." Evelyn's breath caught. The moral weight of it settled on her shoulders like a shawl she could not remove. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said. Paul squeezed her hand once. "Find out," he said. He let go and stood. He walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared into it, as if a list might appear. He pulled out leftovers and began arranging them on plates with deliberate care, the domestic labor of someone trying not to fall apart. Evelyn watched him from the couch. She felt a sharp desire to confess everything, to clean it up with words, to make it less dangerous by naming it fully. But she had promised herself something else. She had promised herself she would not pretend. That night, Paul went to bed early. Evelyn stayed up and folded laundry that didn't need folding. She moved shirts from one pile to another as if the movement might reorganize her heart. At midnight, she sat at the dining table and looked at her phone. There was an email from him. "I've been thinking about what you said. If you still want to talk, I'm here." She stared at the words until they blurred. She typed the message to his number. "It's me, Dot." And then the next, "Can you meet tomorrow?" When she set the phone down, her hands were cold. At 11 the next morning, the river walk was busy in a quiet way. Old couples strolling, a young mother pushing a pram, two men in running shoes moving past with steady breath. The river itself moved with patient insistence, brown-gray under the winter sky. The old bridge arched over it, iron and stone, a piece of history that had endured weather without changing its mind. Evelyn arrived first. She sat on the bench and kept her gloves on, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the water and tried to calm the fast, animal part of her that wanted both escape and collision. When he appeared, walking toward her with that careful gait of someone who didn't want to seem eager, she felt her body react before she could decide how to feel. A quick lift in her chest. A brief, unreasoning gratitude. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at her face as if he had been living on the memory of it and needed to confirm it was real. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she replied. He sat beside her, leaving a careful space. Not a gap of disinterest, a gap of respect, the kind of restraint that could be either tenderness or fear. They watched the river a moment, like two people attending a funeral without knowing whose. "Thank you for coming," he said finally. Evelyn exhaled. "I asked you." "Yes," he said, "but still." She nodded. Her throat felt tight. He glanced at her hands. "Are you cold?" "No," she said, though she was. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he took off his scarf and offered it. Evelyn looked at the scarf as if it were an intimate thing. A piece of him. She shook her head. "I'm fine." He didn't insist. He folded the scarf in his lap instead. The gesture had the patience of someone who had learned not to push. They sat. A cyclist went by. A gull shouted above the water. The world continued. "How was last night?" he asked. Evelyn almost laughed. The question was so simple, and it contained everything. It was, she searched for a word that didn't betray her. "Difficult." He nodded. "Mine too." Evelyn looked at him sharply. "Why?" He stared at the river. "Because I kept thinking about you leaving," he said. "And about what you said. Next time we don't pretend." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Did you tell anyone?" she asked. He turned to her. "No." Evelyn swallowed. "I did." He went still. "You told him?" She nodded once. The air between them tightened. "What did he say?" he asked, and his voice was careful, as if he were stepping near glass. Evelyn stared at the river. "He asked me if I was unhappy." "And are you?" he asked. Evelyn's mouth trembled slightly. She pressed her lips together until she could speak. "No," she said. "Not the way people mean it." He nodded, understanding too well. "And then what?" he asked. Evelyn took a breath. "He asked me if I wanted you." The words hung there, plain and unbearable. He did not look away. His eyes stayed on her face. He didn't flinch. Evelyn's voice lowered. "I couldn't answer." His throat moved as he swallowed. "What did he do?" "He made tea," she said, and something in her cracked, as if tea could fix it. He let out a sound that was not quite laughter, not quite sorrow. "And what are you doing now?" he asked softly. Evelyn turned toward him, finally. "I don't know," she said. "That's why I'm here." He held her gaze. A couple walked past them, arm in arm, moving at the slow pace of people who had survived each other's sharp edges and decided to stay anyway. Evelyn watched them go with a strange ache. "I don't want this to be obscene," she said. He frowned. "Obscene?" "Yes," she said. Two old people suddenly acting like. She stopped, embarrassed by her own words. Like what? He asked. Like our lives weren't already built, she said. Like we're allowed to burn everything down because we feel something. He nodded slowly. We're not allowed, he said. That's the point. Evelyn stared at him. His honesty was almost cruel in its clarity. So why does it feel like we might anyway? She whispered. He looked away, jaw tight. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. Because we're tired, he said. And because time does something to restraint. It turns it into a kind of habit. And then one day you look up and realize you've been surviving instead of living. Evelyn felt tears rise, sudden and unwelcome. She blinked them back. I've lived, she said. So have I, he replied. But we've also postponed. The word landed in her like a confession. Evelyn's phone vibrated in her pocket. She didn't look at it. It vibrated again, insistently. She drew it out. The screen showed Paul's name. Her stomach dropped. He watched her face change. It's him, he said. Evelyn nodded, barely able to speak. She stared at the ringing phone as if it were a small animal that might bite. You should answer, he said gently. Evelyn's hand shook. She pressed accept and lifted the phone to her ear. Paul, she said. His voice came through, calm but tight. Where are you? Evelyn closed her eyes. I'm out, she said. With who? Paul asked. She could hear something behind his voice, a restraint wearing thin. Evelyn looked at the man beside her. He was watching her with a stillness that felt like respect and grief at once. With him, Evelyn said, and the words felt like stepping off something high. There was a pause on the line, long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then Paul said, very quietly, come home. Evelyn's throat tightened. Paul, come home, he repeated, and now there was something else in his voice. Not anger, something worse, a kind of quiet decision. Evelyn's eyes filled. All right, she whispered. She hung up. Her hands went numb. For a moment, she could not look at the man beside her. She felt shame flood her, sharp and hot, and beneath it, a stubborn grief that surprised her. I have to go, she said, voice thin. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't plead. He didn't make it easier by offering escape. I understand, he said. Evelyn stood, unsteady. She pulled her coat tighter, though the air hadn't changed. She looked down at him. He remained seated, his scarf folded in his lap like a surrendered flag. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. His eyes lifted to hers. Neither do I, he replied. But I know what I want. The words hit her hard. Evelyn's breath caught. Don't, she whispered, and she didn't know if she meant don't say it or don't want it. He did not soften it. I want you, he said, quietly, as if speaking the truth under his breath might keep it from becoming a weapon. And I have for a long time, even when I didn't know I did. Evelyn stared at him. The river moved behind him, indifferent, carrying everything forward. Her hands trembled. She wanted to sit back down. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to lean in and do the thing she had not done decades ago. Instead, she said, hoarse, if you say that, you can't take it back. He nodded once. I know. Evelyn's chest tightened with something almost like panic. Then don't say it like a wish, she said. Say it like a decision. He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw the weight of his years, the funerals, the compromises, the quiet rooms, the long practice of being good. I am deciding, he said. Evelyn's eyes burned. Behind her, footsteps approached quickly on the path. Someone jogging. Someone moving with purpose. Evelyn turned slightly, distracted by the sound. Then she froze. Paul was walking toward them from the direction of the bridge, his coat unbuttoned, his face set in that calm expression he wore when he was trying very hard not to show what he felt. Evelyn's mouth went dry. The man beside her followed her gaze. He stood slowly, as if rising into an inevitable weather. Paul stopped a few feet away. He looked at Evelyn first, then at him. For a moment, none of them spoke. The river kept moving. A gull cried out. The world pretended not to notice. Paul's voice was steady when he finally said, "So this is him." Evelyn's throat tightened. She couldn't find words. She could only nod. Paul looked at the man beside her. "And you?" he said, not cruelly, just plainly. "Are you going to tell me what you were doing with my wife?" Evelyn felt her whole body go cold. The man beside her opened his mouth, then stopped. He glanced at Evelyn, as if asking permission with his eyes. Evelyn could not give it. She could not take it back. Paul waited, and Evelyn realized, with a sick certainty, that whatever was said next would not be a conversation they could ever undo. Chapter 3. For a moment, none of them moved. The river went on, indifferent. A runner passed behind Paul, earbuds in, breathing hard, unaware that he had threaded himself through the center of something fragile. When the sound of his steps faded, the silence returned heavier than before. The man beside Evelyn, she still could not think of him by name without flinching, felt every year of his life settle into his spine. He had imagined many versions of this moment in the abstract. None of them had prepared him for the simple fact of Paul's presence. Not furious, not loud, just there. "I'm not doing anything with her," he said at last. His voice was steady, but it took effort. "We're talking." Paul studied him. He had the unsettling calm of someone who had already lost something and was deciding how much more to give away. "Talking," Paul repeated. "About what?" Evelyn closed her eyes. This was it then, the moment where language failed or hardened into shape. "About us," she said, before either of them could answer for her. Paul turned to her. "Us? Yes," she said, forcing the word to hold. "About who we are? And who we've been pretending to be." Paul's mouth tightened. "Pretending," he said softly. "Is that what you think we've been doing?" Evelyn felt something in her recoil. She wanted to say no, to reassure him, to protect the careful life they had built together. But she had promised herself not to pretend. "I think we've been careful," she said, "and grateful, and decent. But I also think there are things we never said out loud because they felt unnecessary or dangerous." Paul looked at her as if seeing her at a distance for the first time. "And now they don't. They feel unavoidable," she replied. He turned back to the man beside her. "How long?" The question landed with weight. It demanded an accounting. He hesitated, then chose precision. "We knew each other years ago," he said, "before either of us married." Paul nodded once. And now, he said, "we met again." "That's not an answer," Paul said. "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth." Paul considered this. His gaze was sharp, but not hostile. He looked like a man measuring a structure, trying to see where it might fail. "Have you touched her?" Paul asked. The question was blunt. Evelyn inhaled sharply. "No," he said immediately. "I haven't." Paul's eyes flicked to Evelyn. She nodded. "Not even." Paul began, then stopped himself. He exhaled slowly. "All right." He took a step back, as if making space for thought. "And yet," Paul said, "you're standing here with her." "Yes," he said. "I am." Paul's jaw tightened. "And you want her." The man beside Evelyn felt the truth press against his teeth. He remembered her words. Say it like a decision. "Yes," he said. "I do." Evelyn's heart lurched. She had known he would say it. She had not known how much it would undo her to hear it spoken in front of Paul. Paul closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in him had shifted. "Thank you," Paul said quietly. "For what?" Evelyn asked, stunned. "For not lying," Paul replied. He looked back at the man. "For not pretending this is harmless." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. "Paul." He raised a hand, not to silence her, to steady himself. "I need to understand something," Paul said. "Are you asking her to leave?" The man shook his head. "No." "Are you asking her to stay?" "No," he said again. "I'm asking her to choose." Paul let out a small, humorless laugh. That's a luxury. Yes, he said. It is. Paul looked down at the ground, then back up. And what will you do, he asked Evelyn, if she chooses you? The question seemed to tilt the world. Evelyn felt it in her knees, her breath. She had imagined this choice in the abstract, but not like this. Not with Paul standing there, dignified and wounded, and still offering her the courtesy of clarity. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what that would look like. Paul nodded. At least you know that. He turned to the man again. And you? He did not look away. I would live with the consequences, he said. Whatever they are. Paul studied him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He extended his hand. Evelyn gasped softly. The man hesitated, then took it. Paul's grip was firm, not aggressive. Human. I don't think you're a villain, Paul said. That almost makes this worse. I know, he replied. Paul released his hand. He stepped back toward Evelyn. We need to go home, Paul said, not unkindly. We need to talk without an audience. Without a river pretending this is poetic. Evelyn swallowed. All right. Paul turned to the man one last time. If you care about her, he said, you will not contact her again until she decides what she's willing to lose. The words cut cleanly. Evelyn felt their truth land hard. He nodded. I won't. Paul looked at him sharply. Promise. I promise. Paul held his gaze, then nodded once, satisfied. He turned and began walking back toward the bridge. Evelyn followed, her steps heavy. After a few paces, she stopped and turned back. He was still standing by the bench, his hands in his coat pockets, his scarf forgotten on the ground. She walked back to him. I'm sorry, she said, the words small and inadequate. He shook his head. Don't be. She reached out and picked up his scarf. She pressed it into his hands, her fingers lingering just a second too long. Wait, she said softly. He looked at her, hope flickering despite himself. I don't know what I'm choosing yet, she said, but I don't want this to disappear into silence. He nodded. It won't. Promise, she asked, echoing Paul without meaning to. He met her eyes. I promise to wait, he said. Not forever, but honestly. Evelyn felt tears spill over then. She wiped them away quickly, ashamed of the display. I'll call you, she said. When I know. He nodded again. I'll be here. She turned and walked back to Paul. They crossed the bridge together without speaking. Halfway across, Paul slowed. You don't have to decide today, he said quietly. Evelyn stared at the water below them. I feel like I already am. Paul stopped. He leaned on the railing, looking out. I married you because you were brave, he said. Not because you were easy. Evelyn closed her eyes. I never wanted to be cruel. I know, Paul said. Neither did I. They stood there a moment longer, the city breathing around them. When they reached home, Paul went into the bedroom and closed the door. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, the kettle cold, the house suddenly unfamiliar. She sat at the table and put her head in her hands. Across the city, the man stood by the river long after they were gone. He watched the water carry everything forward. He felt grief, yes, but also a strange, steady clarity. This was not young love. This was not rescue. This was a reckoning, and it had already begun.